Welcome to our presentation. I'm joined today by Carl, Paul, and Dave, and we'll be talking about the CanSSOC Threat Feed and how it's leveraged by institutions for protection, detection, and intelligence sharing. So a little bit about our agenda. I'll talk about the Threat Feed service, and then I'll pass it on to Carl, Paul, and David. They'll talk about how institutions are using the Threat Feed. And then we'll go over some successes and challenges and open it up to questions. So about me, I'm a security analyst at CanSSOC, have past experience in the private sector, working in a little bit of a lot of things in security like most people. So I was doing vulnerability management, change management, and then primarily working in a SOC environment. So I'm sure most people have already seen this slide, so I'll try and keep it brief. But for those who haven't, it's a good overview of how CanSSOC fits into the big picture and what we're trying to accomplish. So we're part of a shared fabric. Our motto is better than we can do on our own, always in partnership. And ultimately, what we're here to help augment everyone's security posture. We're not here to try and replace anything. We really want to work with our other partners like CANARIE, CCCS, our NREN partners, and specifically the higher ed institutions, CIRA, CUCHIO, REN ISAC, so that we can all improve our security together. So the threat feed, and so this is a really high-end overview, basic overview of how the service works. So on the left, we have the various sources of threat intelligence that we ingest into the threat feed. So among these, we have sources from CCCS, we have our commercial feeds, we have feeds that come from partner institutions, and then we have also OSINT sources. So all of these are ingested into the threat feed and aggregated inside MISP. I'll talk a little bit more about MISP shortly. And then finally, we do a certain level of curation on that threat intelligence, and then create an output, which are the feeds themselves. And then these can be consumed and ingested by various security appliances. So kind of the easiest thing to turn on is the CIRA DNS firewall. And then the next kind of easiest thing to ingest the threat feeds into are next-gen firewalls. But they can also be ingested in IDS systems, SIEMs, or threat intel platforms. There's just a little bit more work. It's less of a set it and forget it kind of thing. You obviously need to build your certain rule sets and stuff like that if you're ingesting threat intelligence into SIEMs and IDS tools. So the other thing to point out is that not everything that's coming into the threat feed is necessarily produced as an output. So there is a curation process, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. So the threat feed intelligence pipeline, basically, we ingest all that threat intelligence, whether it's coming from partner institutions or CCCS, and the first step that we do is a negative curation on that. So threat intelligence, if you know, or seen a bunch of it in the past, there's some very good quality stuff and there's some bad quality stuff, right? And so that negative curation process, what we're doing here is ultimately trying to make sure that we're not blocking anything that's legitimate. So someone might enter something like a Dropbox IP or something like that, that they've noticed on their as part of an attack. Maybe an attacker is using that information or that service, sorry, like Dropbox, to deploy malware. We don't want to block Dropbox. So this negative curation is basically looking at a set of warning lists that we've established. And so these are some top sites, as well as just some custom lists that we've also created ourselves, and basically parsing any indicators that are added into the threat feed service against that. And within a couple of seconds, if they're part of one of these lists, they get disabled, the IDS flag in MISP gets removed, which is one of the key factors to determine if something goes into a feed at the end. And then that information doesn't make its way into the feed. So the next step in the process is we also want to leverage threat intelligence that's coming from pre-vetted sources that we trust. So this high quality threat intelligence, we want to be able to leverage it as quickly as possible to make sure that all the institutions are protected. And so instead of having to manually review this information, we've trusted this information, it's high quality. And so we're doing this automatic positive curation on it. And anything that's getting curated in this automated fashion is still subject to that negative curation. So if there is an indicator that shouldn't have made its way into the feed, that negative curation should still catch it. And then the third step in terms of our curation process is the manual positive curation. So that curation is basically any other OSINT information or other information that makes its way into our MISP platform is reviewed on a manual basis, tagged appropriately, and then finds its way into the feed as well. So as I mentioned, not everything that's added into the MISP platform ends up in the feed. There's a lot of additional information that is in there that's contextual or that's external references to where that OSINT information may have come from, or just general contextual information to better understand the indicators. So that obviously doesn't make its way into the feed. And so a little bit about the two different tools. Ultimately, the main one, as I was talking about, was MISP. So that's the malware information sharing platform. This is where we store all the various indicators and attributes, the contextual information behind it. It's a central location for analysts to investigate those indicators and get more information out of them, as opposed to using something like VirusTotal, whereas if you go run a search against those indicators, that information is now public, right? So MISP is a good starting place to go look. You're not revealing anything to anyone by running a search against an IP or something like that in there. And so MISP is a tool that's been around for quite a while. It's an open source solution. There's a growing community. It was really the best tool to meet the CanSSOC needs at the time. And then we have MindMeld. So MindMeld is what creates the feeds itself. So MindMeld basically has miners. They go and pull various information from MISP based on tags and the time, as well as just the type of indicator it is, and creates the various feeds that are produced at the end that can be ingested by various security tools. So these feeds are created in a variety of formats. They can be sticks, taxi, or URL, depending on what security appliance you're using. They vary. And then the other thing is, so we send out alerts and advisories to institutions with MISP links quite often. So the benefit here is when we're adding indicators, for example, the recent Microsoft Exchange campaign, there was new indicators identified each day by Microsoft, CCCS, even by us. So we were constantly updating the event. And this kind of, the benefit there is it allows us to send one email, but still have institutions able to constantly check and review these indicators and look against their environment and their network to see if they're seeing any kind of activity related to that. So that's how they work together to basically store the information and create the feeds. So why CanSSOC Threat Feed? Well, the benefit here is by having this centralized information, it allows institutions to reduce the time that your analysts are spending trying to curate and find threat intelligence. We're doing that work on our end. So institutions are not doing that all in isolation. It's being done in one location. And then it's also being done in partnership, right? So if there's something that an institution discovers, basically they're able to add that into MISP and everyone can benefit from this through the threat feed. The other thing that we're doing is we're consolidating multiple feeds into one consistent curated feed. So benefit there is you're not trying to figure out all the feeds that are great for you. If you identify a feed that you'd like to see us add, or we're definitely open to that. But in general, you're getting one output that's combining, feeds from commercial partners as well as CCCS, all our partner institutions, where the real magic is at in the future, right? Because if something's happening in Ontario, chances are, that risk is also a risk for Manitoba and Alberta and all the other provinces. And then we're also adding open source intelligence. So that's kind of another benefits, right? Trying to save your institutions. If you have limited resources, we're doing that work of putting in that OSINT information to protect institutions. And then, as I mentioned, there's institutional specific threats that are happening, right? So anything happening in Ontario versus Alberta, us adding those indicators into the platform protects everyone. So whether they're done in an automated or a manual process, being able to share that intelligence with the higher ed community benefits everyone. And so with that, I'll pass it on to Carl. He'll talk a bit about how the University of Toronto is using the Threat Feed service.
Thanks, Axel. I had to remember to unmute. So yes, I'm Carl Chan. I've been with U of T for about 15 years in various systems and network admin roles across the multiple campuses we have. And now I'm at Central Information Security. I'm primarily in charge of our SIEM, and I also take care of some of our internet edge protection systems. So Axel's talked about how CanSSOC creates their threat feed. Well, how do we use it at U of T? Let me talk briefly about the U of T network edge protections. Thanks, Axel. This is a simplified diagram of the U of T network edge. Everything you see here is active-active, dual redundant pairs, from the quad 100 gig links from our internet providers to our gateway routers to the links to our 3 main campuses. The green icons in the middle are Palo Alto next-gen firewalls, and the red dot on each link are optical network taps to our network security analysis tools like Bro, Nessus, etc. The main takeaway from this slide is just that all of the university's traffic flows through these systems, and they're very robust, multi-redundant, extremely fail-safe. Next slide, please. So we currently utilize the CanSSOC Threat Feed automatically in 2 places, directly on our gateway routers here in purple and on our Palo Alto firewall in green. We run a script in our gateway routers that creates BGP black hole routes for suspicious and known bad IPs as detected by our network monitoring tools and honeypots. This system was traditionally used as a quick way to stop traffic right at the edge and prevent downstream systems from being overwhelmed by deny logs during DOS attacks, so we don't end up DOSing ourselves with just log data. But it's been very effective as a first line of defense for our network, blocking just IPs. Since we've added the CanSSOC IP threat feed to the gateway at the beginning of this year, we noticed a reduction in blocks triggered by our internal monitors because these IPs were already flagged and blocked. Next in line is our Palo Alto firewall, where we utilize the external dynamic list or EDL feature to retrieve lists of suspicious and known bad IPs or URLs and domains from external links. And then we can log, alert, or block as appropriate. Conveniently, the CanSSOC Threat Feed provides exactly these types of lists, and then provides them in formats that are easily ingested by various firewall, IBS, IPS manufacturers, and Palo Alto being one of them. In addition, on the firewall, we can log and flag internal devices that are trying to reach out to the systems that are flagged in the threat lists. We hope to integrate that with our ticketing system in the future to automatically generate alerts for potentially compromised systems this way. Next slide. Thanks. So that's how we consume the logs. But as Axel mentioned, and you've probably heard from other presentations this week, CanSSOC is all about sharing and doing things in partnership. We'll say it again, it's better than we can do on our own, always in partnership. So we can do more than simply consume the data. All of the logs on our various critical network devices and systems are sent to our SIEM, where we then forward a copy of certain types of logs to CanSSOC, who are currently using Apache NiFi to ingest the logs for processing. At the moment, we're mostly sending our VPN and shibboleth authentication logs to CanSSOC, where they look for compromised accounts and other suspicious activity. After CanSSOC goes through the creation process, these flagged IPs may get added to the threat feed, which hopefully helps proactively protect our partners from these threats before they can be attacked themselves. We're still constantly working to try to share more data, but aside from just a raw volume of data for a place as big as U of T, there are potential privacy implications when sharing logs that we're always very careful about, but there's a lot of potential to be even more effective and room for lots of improvement. Thanks for your time. Next, we have Paul from the University of Saskatchewan.
Thanks, Carl. Hi, I'm Paul. I'm a security analyst at the University of Saskatchewan. I've been here for almost 4 years now, basically managing the SIEM and kind of the day-to-day security operations. We're a relatively small team, so you wear a lot of hats. I'm also seconded with the Saskatchewan Research Network, and I work with their SIEM as well. Next slide, please. So at the University of Saskatchewan, we are really big on the multiple layers of security method, very similar to U of T. So we are using the CanSSOC Threat Feed in the CIRA DNS D-zone firewall. We're also using it for ingress and egress filtering on our next-gen firewall platform. And finally, we're using it in the SIEM to do some alerting and some historical correlation after the fact. Next slide, please. So these numbers are a little out of date, and I do have up-to-date numbers here. But we noticed that as soon as we turned on the integration in our D-zone firewall, we were getting about triple to almost quadruple the numbers of blocks for malware and phishing domains, and even higher than that for botnet traffic being flagged for DNS queries. Those numbers are still relatively accurate, though. This is over the last month. As for in our next-gen firewall platform, I checked this morning, and we've blocked 2.7 billion inbound packets just from intelligence from CanSSOC, and over 90,000 packets outbound that were then not already caught by blocks from D-zone. So we are seeing a huge amount of traffic that we wouldn't have seen months ago before using the threat feed, which is great. We've also noticed that there has been quite a reduction in our infections, and it seems like our compromised accounts are going down as well, just because now we're blocking traffic to places that they shouldn't be going. Next slide, please. So here's the big part. All of that data is great, but unless we can do something with it, it's not super helpful. So I've been really using it for threat hunting in our SIEM. We're using QRadar, and ingesting that has given us like fantastic context to some of the things that we were seeing before. We would get alerts or blocks from our firewall without knowing why, just, hey, something was blocked. Now we're actually able to then go look in, take those IOCs and go, okay, go into the MISP platform, figure out what was this used for, how is this related to other things, and it has been fantastic to be able to correlate that information with our Sysmon and AppLocker logs specifically to see, hey, something reached out to this, which then did that. Let's figure out what that's a part of, and being able to get that information out of the MISP platform from CanSSOC. Like the context that we're getting is great, especially now using it for threat hunting, because the blocks at D-zone and on our firewall are kind of point in time. So I use it to then go back in history and say, hey, what else has been contacting these things before they were flagged as bad, which has really allowed us to increase our security posture and find some devices that have been compromised for a while. That's more or less what I've got here now, but really the thing is the information and context that we're getting out of this is absolutely amazing. And for a small team right now, there's 2 of us working on the SIEM. Being able to not have to spend our time has been such a great win for us, to not have to spend as much time investigating and doing that incident response when the team at CanSSOC and all of their partners has been doing a great amount ahead of time for us. I believe that is my last slide. So I'll hand that off to Dave.
Thanks, Paul. I appreciate it. So I'm Dave Mayo. I'm been at St. Lawrence College now for about 5 years and about 12 years just in information security, system administration, and network administration. I currently manage the security operations, network operations, as well as the security and network architecture at the college, as well as a lot of our identity management and authentication. Next slide. So how are we using the threat feed? So as many said, you know, the threat feed for us has been fantastic. So we've implemented the CanSSOC threat feeds actually as part of our SOAR solution. And that then is, you know, hosting, being consumed by our firewalls, as well as we're piloting syncing indicators into our XDR endpoint solution, primarily for threat hunting and threat intelligence. We found the CanSSOC feeds to be extremely reliable, and we've been blocking based on IP indicators for the last several months, actually, both ingress and egress. And we're doing that, as others have said, on the Palo Alto Networks firewall. And we've also implemented the CIRA DNS firewall solution, and we're blocking on all indicators of the CanSSOC threat feed category, as well as malware, phishing, as Paul mentioned. So one, you know, unique thing about our deployment, I guess, is we are utilizing our SOAR platform to consume the lists. And that gives our analysts the ability to enrich indicators in the event of a false positive, and the ability to quickly address it through our SOAR platform. As I said, we've had very little false positives, and it's been overall a very positive experience. Next slide. So I just wanted to provide just a quick overview. I hope that's everybody can see that, but you know, just a quick overview of how we're using the threat intelligence feed with our SOAR solution. So the outputted threat feed files, you can see there the various threat feeds that CanSSOC outputs. We then implement, we ingest those into our SOAR solution, where we do a lot of our incident tracking and indicator management. You know, we do have some other integrations as well, things like VirusTotal, autofocus threat intelligence, the ability to push indicators of compromise to our XDR solutions. So any endpoint will trigger an incident if they're communicating even off the network to any of those indicators of compromise. We still have a couple, you know, open source threat feeds, but with the CanSSOC threat feed, and I'll get to this in a later slide, we were able to reduce the amount of individual threat feeds that we have to subscribe to and curate by about 75%. And being a small team, that was a huge win for us. And we also didn't have the budget for some of the commercial partners like Recorded Future and things like that, as you know, so having that part of the CanSSOC threat feed has been fantastic. And then, you know, ipinfo.io, who is that sort of thing. The idea behind all those integrations is, in the event, you know, a false positive is reported to us, we also use the MISP portal heavily. And I think there's great opportunity to potentially pull in some of the great contextual information that MISP has into our SOAR solution as well. That would be very cool to do. But, you know, just some of the investigation and manual things, if, you know, if a reported false positive comes in, some of what our analysts have to do, you know, check, you know, the IP reputation, check the who is on the domain, check, you know, VirusTotal, that sort of thing. We've just automated that, and I'll show that in a couple slides where, you know, they can enrich the indicator, and our SOAR platform goes out and checks all those sources as well. And then finally, our SOAR platform then outputs the EDLs for our PAN-OS firewalls, as well as you know, our SIEM solution. We're currently looking to integrate that with Azure Sentinel. Next slide. So this is just a quick example of a domain that came through from the CanSSOC Threat Feed. It's just an example of what our analysts would see. And then, if this was reported as a false positive, given the domain name, I doubt very much it's the false positive. They would be able to enrich the indicator. And when they do that, next slide. I think if you just click once more, Axel, it'll pop up. There we go. Yeah. So they hit enrich indicator, then it would go out, to check virus total, autofocus, that sort of thing, just to be able to help confirm that, yeah, that's likely, a true positive, and that the analyst can then note and close the incident. And this has been really helpful because, we were doing this a lot of, manually a lot of the time. We would go to virus total, we would go to who is, we would go to IP info, and it's just helped us be able to do a lot of that investigation in an automated method. Next slide. And this is just an example of a bad IP. So you can see here that the bad IP, and I chose this one specifically because, one of those things that we're doing initially is we do block Tor exit nodes, both ingress and egress. So, you can see here that, they've enriched the indicator. It's gone out and checked autofocus, virus total. It's checked the CanSSOC threat feed. It doesn't exist there. It's put in Google Maps as well as pulled in the IP details from ipinfo.io. And we can see that, while that IP is technically good and not in those lists, it does exist as a Tor exit node. So we do consider that a bad indicator and block that. Next slide. And just one more. Yep. So just, the value for our organization and our team members. So since onboarding the CanSSOC Threat Feed, it's greatly increased our prevention capabilities at the college. And, the big one is it reduces the amount of threat intelligence subscriptions we need to subscribe to, the complexity in ensuring different sources are, updated regularly, consumed, and aggregated properly. Axel and the team have been fantastic to work with, especially through Slack. Love the Slack channel there. And as I said, we were able to reduce our integrations by about 75%. We were ingesting a whole bunch of other threat feeds before, mostly open source, because we didn't have a whole lot of budget for commercial threat feeds, but we found a lot of those were replaced by the CanSSOC Threat Feed. And then the MISP portal has been fantastic. So, I know we saw a lot that we do through our SOAR platform, and that's just, our primarily internal security operations. And right now it is manual. So if we do notice any false positives, we still make sure to report those through MISP. I think there is potential for some great integration between the two solutions in a more automated method. But MISP has been fantastic to also provide our team, when they see something come across in our SOAR platform, they can log into MISP and get some context around that data. Just as Paul said, I mean, we can see that it's blocked, but why was it blocked? There's great information in the MISP portal about that. And, as Paul said, we're a smaller team. We've got a very small security team, and we need to invest time in automating a lot of our analysis and incident response. So we're early in our SOAR journey, but it is something we're looking to utilize more as time goes on. It's sometimes hard to invest that time into automating tasks because it's so easy to click, click, click and finish. But that time adds up. So we're really trying to make an effort to utilize the solution to automate more tasks. I think that's about it for my presentation. I'll hand it back over to Axel. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Carl. Thanks, Paul, and thanks, David. So just to wrap up some of the successes and challenges, as you've heard from Paul, Carl, and Dave, there's quite a lot of benefits to using the Threat Feed service, used in different ways. In terms of just struggles with relevancy of threat intelligence, it's not always easy to get good quality threat intelligence. And so part of our negative curation process really tries to address that. But we really try and focus on high quality threat intel, because the last thing we want to do is be sharing intelligence with institutions and causing a denial of service or something like that on anyone's service. So our focus really on that high quality threat intelligence, our curation process, making sure we're not putting in threat intelligence that's outdated or that might be erroneous in some ways, has been a large focus for our team. And it's not to say we haven't had incidents. I think with any service, there are always incidents, but we've had very few of them overall, and we've really focused on trying to resolve them as quickly as possible. On average, I'd say there's maybe 1 or 2 a month at kind of most in the last few months. And part of that has really just been because of our lessons learned, improving our curation process, the logic behind that, and just improving our overall process on how we respond to these. And as Paul and Carl and Dave all mentioned, the major benefit, right, the big success is there's been a significant overall reduction in malicious traffic that these organizations have seen when they've enabled the Threat Feed service. So I mean, aside from just being able to go in and look at that threat intelligence in our MISP platform and get better contextual information, there's that simple, very easy, set it up in your firewall and block, or, if you have resources and time, are able to automate using this threat intelligence. There's also those benefits of including it in your SOAR or your SIEM to kind of facilitate your analyst's time. So yeah, with that, I'd like to thank CANHEIT and Paul, Carl, and Dave for joining me today, and open it up to questions.
All right, thank you for that session, guys. That was great. I have a couple of questions so far. The first one is for Axel from Mark Galton of Waterloo. What are you looking at for replacing MindMeld?
Yeah, so I think I had that on the slide very briefly, but didn't really talk about it too much. So we're looking at replacing MindMeld with an internal custom solution. Part of the reasons is there are some limitations to the way MindMeld deals with taxi feeds, and there's a few other limitations in just the usage of the tool. It's not as actively maintained as MISP, for example. So building our own solution will give us more flexibility in the way that we use MISP, and address being able to build more contextual feeds that can be better leveraged in tools like SIEMs and IDSs. So basically an internal solution is what we're working on.
All right, very good. Thank you. I have another question from Mark, actually. Are you using dzone and Threat Feed at Campus Edge or also at remote endpoints? We're looking at distributed filters for DNS, sorry, filtering for DNS. I don't know if any of you were more eager to answer that.
Yeah, I can answer that one. So we are using the dzone as our primary resolvers on our main on-campus DNS resolvers. So it forwards off to that. So on campus for BYOD networks and managed networks, that's where it's being used. For remote endpoints, most of them are connecting back over VPN. So those ones will use those resolvers as well. We are in the middle kind of a project for rolling out always on VPN to every endpoint, at which point every endpoint that is a university asset, whether it's on campus or off, will be utilizing dzone.
Thank you for that. I have another one here from David Saunders. He asks, how would you suggest starting to consume for these in how would you suggest starting to consume these for an institution that does not currently do so? Start with the smart firewall?
Yeah, so that's the easiest one, right? It's really just ingesting the feeds into your firewall and getting them to block. Obviously, adding them into your IDS or your SIEM or SOAR platform or anything like that is more work, right? Because you need to build actions on that intelligence. So simplest way to use them right now is really just ingest them into your firewall, block, gain the big benefits from doing that. And then as you get more time, there are absolutely benefits to ingesting it into other security appliances. But biggest bang for your buck, start with the firewall. That's where you'll get the most return on your time.
Thank you, Axel. While we're waiting for some more questions to come in, can you tell us about some of the more difficult challenges that you've had to face this year? Maybe a change in the culture, maybe a shift in some of the way that we're used to doing things on a daily basis? This is just a general question to any of you if you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, I guess I can start with that one. With anything, it's trust, right? It's getting people to use a platform and trust the platform and see that it adds benefit. So just getting people to start the conversations, to use the tool, to give us feedback on more of what they want to see and how we can improve is where we've been focused. But with everything being remote, that's been kind of a blessing and a little tricky too, right? Because sometimes you'd be in the room with the people and it's easier to get that feedback. Whereas remote, the benefit here, it's with all kinds of different institutions. So we're just working on trying to make sure we're touching in with institutions as needed and making sure we're supporting them. So if you've deployed Threat Feed and you have questions and you're not sure about stuff, please feel free to reach out to me or the CanSSOC team. We really want this program to be a success for everyone and for people to benefit from it. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, that definitely answers my question. Thank you. I know communication has been a little bit hard this year, but this has given us a chance to focus on making our remote tactics more robust. As you were saying, it's always easier to get feedback in the room, but of course we're learning to work differently this year. I don't know if anyone else had any other comments. We don't really have any more questions in the Q&A as of now. I don't know if Paul or Dave wanted to add anything to what Axel was saying.
Yeah, sure. I can add something real quick. One thing I've noticed of this huge shift to remote for us is kind of like what Axel said, but I'm finding that our communication now is better than it was when we were all in person, not just internally, but also with other organizations, right? Like with CanSSOC and CANARIE and all these groups that now have these kind of communal Slack channels that may have existed, but weren't as utilized, at least not by us. So I'm finding that one of the best things to actually have come out of this is that it's much easier now to work with people, and we're not having to now try to find the exact perfect meeting time when 30 people can be in the same room at the same time. We can get a 5-minute call going, get some stuff done. It's shifted, I think, for the better, at least on that side for us.
Thank you. We have one more comment from Mark Galton of Waterloo. This one, if Dave, you could answer this one. He says, we're split tunnel. That's the challenge with VPN. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, I just we still require DNS traffic. Like we're split tunnel too, but you can, depending on your VPN provider, require DNS queries to still go over the VPN to a DNS server you specify. So that's been really helpful for our DNS firewall. Unfortunately, I don't think we'll ever get out of being our split tunnel, especially with home printers and things like that of our staff. But it has been helpful. We run Palo Alto Global Protect, but if you're running Cisco NE Connect, you can definitely control DNS queries in that split tunnel method.
Good to know. Good to know. Thank you very much to everyone. We still have some time left, so I would encourage if anyone had any questions to ask, we still have some time left while we have our panelists here. I don't know if anyone had any other comments to add. It would appear we don't have any more questions. I would leave the floor for one of you if you want to add anything else. It's entirely up to you, or we can end the session earlier.
Yeah, I really just want to thank CANHEIT for putting on such a great conference. It's been really good, and thank you for the opportunity to present and talk about the threat feed service here.
We actually have one more comment that just trickled in, Axel. It's from Kasing. How are you automating the feeds? SOAR, SOAR?
I don't know if that's a question for me or Axel. Are you asking about our SOAR solution, or is it just the CanSSOC Threat Feed?
Yeah, I wasn't sure about that one.
Maybe Kasing, if you could clarify with your comment within the question, within the Q&A section.
Okay, yeah, so for the CanSSOC threat feeds, basically based on the information that goes into MISP, whether they're tagged as a generic threat or a phishing threat, and then based on the attributes themselves, they get mined by the MineMeld tool and put into various feeds. So Dave had them on his slide. There was 6 examples, but we're looking to expand beyond that. But ultimately, those 6 feeds are created based off specific tags and information in MISP. So whether they need to be within a certain time frame, a certain specific type of attribute. So obviously, you don't have domains going in the IPv4 feed and stuff like that. And then they're contextualized based on whether or not the event was related to phishing or a generic threat or malicious or something like that, or if it's a C2, etc. So that's, yeah, so back to IDS type stuff. We're looking to build more feeds because we want more contextual information between the feeds as opposed to having them lumped all into a generic threat feed, so that they can be used a little bit more effectively depending on the security tool that you're using.
I just saw the follow-up question there. So the SOAR example was how we're utilizing the output of the CanSSOC threat feed. So we actually ingest those into our SLC SOAR platform as plain text feeds to manage indicators and incidences through that. And then we do a little bit of work there and some additional curation on some other third-party sources, as well as the indicator enrichment that I showed, and rehost those. So that's actually what our firewalls ingest, is the lists that are hosted or outputted from our SOAR platform. And the CanSSOC threat feed is just a incredible threat intelligence source that we ingest into that platform. Hope that helps.
Well, thank you very much. That was extremely informative. I thought that was a great session. Thanks for coming. Thanks for having this discussion with us. If there are any more questions, I would encourage anyone to ask them in the Q&A section. If not, I would like to wish everyone a great day, and we'll be talking soon. Please enjoy the rest of the CANHEIT sessions, and hopefully we'll see each other soon. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks everyone. Have a good day.
Enjoy CANHEIT.